Sheriff Emma Carter knew every inch of Redwood County, Texas. The sunburnt roads, the honky-tonk bars, the old gas stations, she had sworn to protect them all. At 37, she had earned her respect the hard way, fighting through a male-dominated world with nothing but grit and a steady hand on her revolver. But tonight, the law meant nothing. Emma sat alone in her patrol truck, parked outside a dimly lit motel on the edge of town. Her heart pounded like boots on a wooden floor. She had followed her gut here, and what she saw through the rain-streaked windshield made her sick. Her husband, Staff Sergeant Jake Carter, home from deployment, walked out of room 207, shirt half-buttoned, belt undone. Behind him, adjusting her dress, was Melissa Barnes. Not just any woman. Emma's childhood best friend. Emma gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles turning white. Jake kissed Melissa one last time before stepping into his truck, his deep laughter cutting through the humid night air. Emma's world shattered. For a woman who had faced down cartel smugglers, bank robbers, and crazed meth heads, betrayal was the one enemy she never saw coming. She could have pulled him over, arrested him, confronted Melissa. But Emma wasn't just a sheriff. She was a wife, a woman scorned. And in that moment, she wasn't thinking like an officer of the law. She was thinking like a killer. The call came in just past dawn. "Sheriff, we got a body." Emma was already at her desk, staring blankly at a half-empty cup of coffee, when the radio crackled. "Who?" she asked, her voice steady. "Melissa Barnes. Found in her house. It's bad, Sheriff. You're going to want to see this yourself." Emma's pulse quickened, but she masked it with the calm of a seasoned cop. "On my way," she said. She grabbed her hat and stepped outside into the dry Texas morning. The sun was just beginning to rise over the distant hills, painting the sky with soft orange and red. But today there was no beauty in it. She drove to Melissa's place, a modest ranch-style home sitting on the outskirts of town. Redwood County didn't see many murders, maybe one or two in a bad year, but something told her this case would be different. Deputy Logan Pierce stood by the front door, arms crossed. A younger officer, Danny Ruiz, was already throwing up in the bushes. "It's ugly, Sheriff," Logan said, his voice grave. Emma walked inside. Blood, so much blood. Melissa lay sprawled on her living room floor, her throat slashed deep enough to nearly sever her head. Dark stains soaked the beige carpet. The air smelled metallic and sharp. Emma took a slow breath. "Forced entry?" she asked, kneeling beside the body. "Negative," Logan replied. "Door was locked from the inside. No sign of struggle. Feels personal. Personal." That was the word Emma feared. She turned Melissa's wrist gently. The skin was still warm. Time of death? Between 1 and 3 a.m., according to the ME. Emma studied the crime scene. Melissa's phone was missing, but her wallet sat untouched on the coffee table. A bottle of wine, half empty, rested beside two glasses. Two glasses. Had Melissa had a guest? Emma forced herself to keep her face neutral. "Where's Jake?" she asked. Logan shifted uncomfortably. "At the base. His unit had a night exercise. He's got an alibi." Emma exhaled. Good. That would keep suspicion away from him. For now. Bring in her co-workers, friends, anyone who saw her last. "Let's get the surveillance footage from local traffic cams too. I want a timeline." Logan nodded. Emma stood. "And Logan, call in the state police. We need a seasoned investigator on this." Logan's brows furrowed. "You sure?" Emma forced a tired smile. "Just a precaution." Deep down, she knew the truth. A real investigator would uncover everything, and she had to be ready. Sheriff Emma Carter had built a career on staying composed under pressure. But as she stood over Melissa Barnes's mutilated body, she knew this case would test every ounce of her control. By the time the state police arrived, Emma had the scene locked down. Officers secured the perimeter, crime scene techs photographed the evidence, and the county coroner zipped Melissa into a black body bag. The smell of death lingered in the warm Texas air. Then he walked in, Detective Marshall Hayes. Tall, silver-haired, and sharp-eyed, Hayes had the reputation of a bloodhound. Once he picked up a scent, he never let go. With 25 years in homicide investigations, he had cracked some of Texas's most twisted cases. Sheriff Carter, he greeted, extending a firm hand. Detective Hayes, thanks for coming on short notice. He scanned the crime scene with a slow, deliberate gaze. Tell me what we got. Emma briefed him on the basics. Melissa Barnes, 36, found dead in her living room. No forced entry. Likely knew her killer. And your husband's alibi? Hayes asked, cutting straight to the point. Emma stiffened. He wasted no time. He was on base for a night exercise. Verified. Hayes nodded but didn't write anything down. He was the kind of man who filed important details away in his head first. He walked through the crime scene, pausing at the wine bottle and 2 glasses. She had company before she died, he murmured. Emma's stomach twisted. Did your deputies dust for prints? Hayes asked. They're working on it, Emma replied. He picked up a blood-stained photo from the floor. One of Melissa and Emma, arms around each other, smiling in front of a lake. You two were close? Emma swallowed. Since childhood. Hayes turned the photo in his hands. Losing a friend like that must be hard. And finding her like this? That's a different kind of pain. Emma kept her face unreadable. Just want to catch the bastard who did this. Hayes looked at her for a long moment, then set the photo down. Let's start with her last movements. Who saw her last? Emma motioned to Logan, who handed Hayes a report. She left work at 6 p.m., stopped at a liquor store at 7. Security cameras show her buying that wine. No sign of a second person. Her car was found in the driveway. No disturbances inside except for the attack itself. Hayes flipped through the notes. So she invites someone over, shares a drink, and ends up dead. Killer knew her, had no reason to break in, and left without taking anything. Emma nodded. Hayes tapped the wine glasses. If this was a crime of passion, we might get lucky with prints or DNA. Emma forced herself to nod again, but she already knew there wouldn't be any. By the time the sun began to set, Emma had to face the one thing she had been avoiding all day. Jake. She drove to Fort Hood, where her husband was stationed. The base was buzzing with activity. Soldiers in training gear, MPs at the gates, officers walking between buildings. She flashed her badge, got clearance, and found Jake in the barracks gym. He was bench pressing, his muscular arms glistening with sweat. When he spotted her, he sat up, wiping his face with a towel. Emma, what are you doing here? She studied him carefully. He looked normal, relaxed, maybe even a little surprised to see her, but not rattled. Melissa's dead, she said. His face changed instantly. What? What do you mean dead? Murdered last night. Jake's expression darkened. Jesus, what happened? That's what we're trying to figure out. He stood, rubbing the back of his neck. God, Emma, I know you two were close. Damn, who would do that to her? She wanted to scream, You did, you cheating bastard! But she kept her voice steady. Where were you last night? Jake sighed. I told you, on base. We had a training exercise that started at midnight and ran until 4 a.m. You can check with my CO. Emma already had. His alibi was airtight, which meant if anyone looked into her husband, the trail would go cold, which was exactly what she wanted. I can't believe it, Jake muttered. Melissa didn't have enemies. She was sweet. Who the hell would want her dead? Emma watched him closely. He had no idea. No idea that she knew about him and Melissa. No idea what she had done. No idea that she was standing here, talking to him, while a seasoned investigator was already digging for the truth. She forced out a breath. Yeah, it doesn't make sense. But it would soon, because Marshall Hayes never let go of a scent, and Emma Carter had left behind just enough to be found. Detective Marshall Hayes had worked enough murder cases to know when something didn't add up. In this case, it stank to high heaven. Melissa Barnes was murdered inside her own home. No forced entry, no robbery, no defensive wounds. That told Hayes two things. She trusted her killer, and she never saw it coming. The crime scene was clean. Too clean. No DNA under her nails, no hair, no obvious prints, except for hers. But Hayes knew one truth better than any other. There's no such thing as a perfect murder. The killer had slipped up somewhere, and he was going to find it. Back at the sheriff's station, Hayes sat across from Deputy Logan Pierce and Officer Danny Ruiz, reviewing what they had so far. Last confirmed sighting was 7 p.m. at the liquor store, Logan said. Bought a bottle of wine, went straight home. No visitors spotted on the street cams near her house. That means either the killer was already inside, or they came in without being seen. Hayes nodded, leaning back. Any word on the prints from the wine glasses? Danny shook his head. Wiped clean, like someone knew exactly what to do. Hayes smiled grimly. That's what I thought. Crimes of passion were usually messy. But this was methodical, precise, premeditated. What about the husband? Hayes asked. Sergeant Jake Carter, Logan said, flipping through his notes. On base from midnight to 4 a.m. Alibi confirmed by multiple witnesses. Hayes tapped his fingers on the desk. Convenient. Logan frowned. You think he hired someone? Maybe, Hayes said. Or maybe someone killed for him. Danny cleared his throat. You mean the sheriff? A long silence filled the room. Logan shifted uncomfortably. Come on, man, that's a reach. Hayes didn't reply right away. Instead, he turned to Logan. How well do you know Sheriff Carter? Logan hesitated. She's a damn good cop. Hard-working. Been running this county better than most men before her. That's not what I asked, Hayes said, his eyes steady. Logan sighed. We don't talk personal, but I know she and Melissa were close. Grew up together. I can't see her doing this. Neither can I, Hayes admitted. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that people only show you what they want you to see. By midday, Hayes had one more stop to make. Emma Carter's house. He drove past the iron gates leading up to the sheriff's modest ranch-style home. The land stretched wide, horses grazing in the distance. It was the picture of Texas charm, but behind every perfect picture was an ugly truth waiting to be found. Emma opened the door before he even knocked. Detective. Her voice was calm, unreadable. Sheriff, Hayes said, tipping his hat. Mind if I ask you a few questions? Of course. She stepped aside, letting him in. The house was neat, almost too neat. No sign of grief, no sign of sleepless nights. You holding up okay? Hayes asked, watching her closely. I've seen worse, she said simply. I bet you have. Hayes nodded, taking a slow glance around. No photos of Melissa in sight. Strange, considering they were best friends. When was the last time you saw Melissa? Emma folded her arms. 2 weeks ago, she stopped by my office. Nothing special, just catching up. You two were close? Like sisters? So you had no idea she was sleeping with your husband? Silence. For just a fraction of a second, Emma's fingers twitched. Then she let out a short laugh. Excuse me? You heard me, Hayes said, his tone cool. Emma leaned against the kitchen counter. Detective, I don't know what you're getting at, but I had no reason to hurt Melissa. If I knew about the affair, I'd have divorced Jake, not killed her. That's the logical thing to do, Hayes agreed. But emotions aren't logical. Betrayal makes people do stupid things, dangerous things. Emma's expression didn't change. You don't have a suspect yet, do you? She asked. Not yet. Then I suggest you find one. She pushed off the counter, her blue eyes locked onto his. Because I'd hate for you to waste your time chasing ghosts. Hayes smiled. Oh, Sheriff, I don't chase ghosts. I chase killers. And he was going to prove that Emma Carter was one. Detective Marshall Hayes knew how to push people. Sometimes a single well-placed question could shake the truth loose, and Sheriff Emma Carter had just given him the slightest crack to work with. She wasn't surprised when he mentioned her husband's affair. That told him one thing. She already knew. And if she knew, then her best friend turning up dead wasn't just a coincidence. Hayes left her house with more questions than answers. But one thing was clear. Emma Carter was hiding something. Now he just had to prove it. Back at the station, Hayes sat down with Deputy Logan Pierce. I want to know everything about the sheriff's movements in the last 48 hours, Hayes said. Logan hesitated. Detective, with all due respect, she's our boss. And she's also the last person I can place near the victim. Hayes shot back. I need phone records, security footage, and if she called in sick, I want to know when. Logan sighed but nodded. I'll pull what I can. While Logan got to work, Hayes turned his attention to Melissa's house. Let's go over this again, he said, pulling up the crime scene photos. Danny Ruiz pointed at the wine bottle. 2 glasses, but no prints, which means someone wiped them clean, Hayes said. Danny nodded. Whoever it was wanted to cover their tracks. But why wipe the glasses and not anything else? Hayes mused. What about the security cams in the area? Danny frowned. No footage of anyone going in or out, which means they either parked far away or they walked. Hayes stared at the evidence, his gut telling him the answer was right in front of him. And then it hit him. Melissa's car. Danny blinked. What about it? You said it was in the driveway, right? Yeah. Was the driver's seat adjusted? Danny frowned. I don't think we checked. Check now, Hayes ordered. If it's adjusted differently from how Melissa usually drove, then someone else was in that car. Danny grabbed his keys and headed out. Meanwhile, Hayes pulled up his notes on Emma Carter. If she killed Melissa, she would have needed a way to get home after, and that meant there was a missing vehicle somewhere. An hour later, Logan walked in with a file in his hands. You're going to want to see this, he said, setting it down. Hayes opened it and scanned the report. Emma had taken the day off before Melissa's murder. No sick call, no emergency, just a last-minute decision. She never takes days off, Logan muttered. But she did that day, Hayes said, because she had something to do. Logan shifted uncomfortably. Detective, if you're right, I am, Hayes interrupted. We just need proof. At that moment, Danny walked in, looking pale. Melissa's driver's seat was pushed all the way back, he said. She was 5 feet 5 inches tall. Whoever drove that car last had to be taller. Like Sheriff Carter's height. Hayes nodded slowly. Gentlemen, he said, standing up. I think we just found our first real piece of evidence. And it was only the beginning. Detective Marshall Hayes didn't believe in coincidences. Sheriff Emma Carter taking an unexpected day off. Melissa Barnes's car seat adjusted for someone taller. A crime scene too clean for a spontaneous attack. Everything pointed to premeditation. But Hayes needed more than just suspicion. He needed solid proof. And he had a feeling he was about to get it. Run a search on Emma Carter's truck, Hayes told Deputy Logan Pierce. Find out if it was picked up on any traffic cams the night of the murder. You think she drove herself? Logan asked. No, Hayes said. She's smarter than that. But if she borrowed a car or had someone pick her up, we might be able to track it. Logan got to work while Hayes focused on another angle. The sheriff's alibi. She claimed she was home all night, but alibis could be broken. Danny Ruiz returned an hour later, shaking his head. No traffic cams picked up her truck near Melissa's house. Doesn't mean she wasn't there, Hayes said. Just means she covered her tracks well. You think she walked? Danny asked. Maybe. Or maybe she took a different car. That's when Logan walked back in, looking uneasy. Detective, I pulled something strange from the security footage at a gas station near Melissa's house. Hayes leaned in. Show me. Logan turned his laptop around, playing a grainy clip. At exactly 10:47 p.m., a dark-colored Ford sedan pulled into the gas station. The driver never got out, never bought anything, just sat there for 3 minutes, then drove away. The timestamp? 40 minutes before Melissa was murdered. Whose car? Hayes asked. Logan exhaled. Belongs to Jake Carter, the sheriff's husband. Silence filled the room. Hayes's mind raced. If Jake was near Melissa's house that night, did he have a hand in this? Or worse, was he helping his wife cover it up? Hayes wasted no time. He drove straight to the sheriff's house. Emma opened the door, her expression unreadable. Detective, she said coolly. Sheriff, Hayes replied. We need to talk. She stepped aside, letting him in. You told me you were home all night, Hayes began. I was. Then why was your husband's car near Melissa's house 40 minutes before she was murdered? For the first time, Emma hesitated. I don't know, she said. Try again, Hayes pressed. Because right now it looks like he either knew something or you did. Emma's jaw tightened. I had nothing to do with Melissa's death. Then prove it, Hayes said. A long silence stretched between them. Then finally Emma spoke. Jake came home late that night, she admitted. Said he was out clearing his head. I didn't ask questions. Why not? Because I already knew. Knew what? Emma swallowed hard. That he was sleeping with Melissa. Hayes studied her face. She wasn't lying, at least not about that. When did you find out? 3 weeks ago. And you never confronted him? Emma let out a bitter laugh. I did. He denied it, of course. But I knew. Hayes nodded slowly. One last question, Sheriff. Emma folded her arms. What? Where were you between 10 and 11 p.m. the night Melissa was murdered? Emma didn't blink. At home. But this time, Hayes saw it. The slightest flicker of doubt in her eyes. She was lying, and he was about to prove it. Detective Marshall Hayes had seen it before. The way a guilty person hesitated at the wrong moment. How their breath hitched when they realized they were caught in a lie. Sheriff Emma Carter had just made that mistake. She said she was home at the time of the murder, but Hayes didn't believe her, and now he was going to prove she wasn't. Back at the station, Hayes spread everything out on the evidence board. 10:47 p.m., Jake Carter's car spotted near Melissa's house. 11:25 p.m., Melissa's neighbor reported hearing a noise. 11:42 p.m., time of death estimated by the coroner. That left a 55-minute window. If Jake was there, what was he doing? Logan Pierce asked. More importantly, Hayes said, where was Emma? Danny Ruiz entered, waving a document. Detective, I pulled Jake Carter's phone records. He made a call at 10:53 p.m. Guess who he called? Melissa, Hayes guessed. No, Danny said. Emma. A chill ran through Hayes. She lied. The next morning, Hayes called Emma Carter into the station. She arrived in her uniform, as composed as ever. What's this about, Detective? She asked, arms crossed. We need to clarify your timeline from the night Melissa was murdered, Hayes said. I told you, I was home. Hayes slid the phone records across the table. Your husband called you at 10:53 p.m. That's 47 minutes before Melissa was killed. Emma didn't even look at the paper. So where were you when he called? She finally glanced at the document, but her face remained unreadable. At home. Hayes leaned forward. Sheriff, if you keep lying to me, I will arrest you right now. Emma's fingers twitched. Fine, she said. I wasn't home. Where were you? Hayes pressed on. B.I. was out. Where? Emma exhaled sharply. I followed Jake, she admitted. I saw his car near Melissa's house. I parked down the street and waited. Waited for what? Emma's jaw tightened. For proof. I wanted to catch them together. Did you go inside? Number Hayes studied her. She was holding something back. When did you leave? Emma hesitated. A little after 11, which meant she was still there when Melissa was killed. As soon as Emma left, Hayes turned to Danny. She's hiding something. You think she did it? I think she knows more than she's saying. Danny nodded. Want me to dig into Jake's records too? Yes, and pull security footage from any gas stations between Melissa's house and Emma's. If she left like she claims, we should see her truck. Danny left, and Hayes stared at the board. If Emma followed Jake to Melissa's house, then either she killed Melissa after Jake left, or she saw who did. Either way, the truth was closing in on her, and soon there'd be nowhere left to run. Detective Marshall Hayes had cracked some of the toughest cases in Texas, but this one was different. It wasn't just about a murder, it was about revenge. And now all the pieces were finally falling into place. Sheriff Emma Carter had lied about her whereabouts. Jake Carter had been at Melissa's house the night of the murder. And now Hayes was about to find out exactly what happened. Danny Ruiz rushed into the office, holding a thick folder. Detective, we pulled more footage. He laid out a series of security camera images on the table. The first showed Jake's black Ford sedan pulling into Melissa's driveway at 10:47 p.m. The second, taken 11:10 p.m., showed another vehicle parked a block away. A silver truck. Emma Carter's truck. She was there, Logan said. We already knew that, Hayes said, but she said she left before the murder. Danny tapped the next image, then explained this. Her truck was still there at 11:40 p.m. Hayes' heart pounded. That was 2 minutes before Melissa's estimated time of death. She lied again, Logan muttered. There was no more doubt. Hayes went straight to Emma Carter's house. She answered the door in her uniform, her face unreadable. Detective, she said calmly, You lied to me. Emma's jaw tightened. We have your truck on camera. It never left until after Melissa was dead. Emma exhaled. I didn't. Enough. Hayes stepped forward. It's over, Emma. She stared at him for a long moment. Then finally her shoulders sagged. Fine, she whispered. I killed her. Emma sat across from Hayes in the interrogation room, her hands folded. Tell me everything, Hayes said. She nodded slowly. I knew about the affair, she said. I followed Jake that night, saw him go inside. I waited. At 11:15, I saw him leave. He didn't even look back. He just left. And that's when you went inside? Tears welled in her eyes, but her voice stayed steady. Melissa was sitting in the living room, drinking wine. She wasn't even surprised to see me. She just smirked. Emma swallowed hard. I asked her how long it had been going on. She said 6 months. 6 months, detective. Hayes said nothing. She wasn't sorry, Emma continued. She wasn't ashamed. She just laughed. Said she was giving Jake what I couldn't. Her fist clenched. Snapped. I grabbed the wine bottle and hit her with it. Hayes leaned forward. One hit wouldn't have killed her. Emma closed her eyes. Number. She got up, tried to fight back. I grabbed the knife from the kitchen, and then it was over. Emma Carter, the sheriff of Redwood County, was arrested for the murder of Melissa Barnes. Jake Carter, devastated and in shock, filed for divorce immediately. Hayes sat at his desk that night, staring at the case files. A tragic story of love, betrayal, and revenge. And all because no one saw it coming.